Afternoon. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Thank you. My name is Teresa Yanovich. I'm an associate professor here in the department. And I have the privilege of welcoming you today to the Ellen Berkman Memorial Lecture, also our department grand rounds. And just we're going to have our special guest speaker is going to do a wonderful tribute to Dr. Berkman before his talk, but I'll just add in my 2 cents that when I was a doctoral student here in the Knots, I had the pleasure of having Alan as my academic advisor for a few years. And I have really solid memory of him sitting in his office and saying to me, well, if you see an injustice, you have to go do something about it. And it was actually that advice that set me on a path of about a decade of research on Roma health disparities, which was kind of groundbreaking at the time in the Balkans. So that phrase echoes in my head and kind of sits in my pocket as a reminder in all the work I do. So we also have today, we're very privileged to have with us Barbara Zeller and Sarah Berkman Zeller. And so if you could, do you want to come up and say hello? That would be great.
Hi, everyone. I really want to thank Mailman and the Department of Epidemiology for this amazing memorial lecture course. I mean, for 16, or I think it's about 16 years at this point, it's been really important about bringing to the fore the issues of human rights and justice. And I want to thank Alfredo because he's a friend and a wonderful comrade in all this work for all these years. But I think it's particularly important because, as we know, and I'm alumni of Columbia, the disappointments with some of the capitulations to authoritarianism for the university and this department and people in public health have been really resisting this. And I think particularly, for me, so disturbing about the repression of constitutional and human rights about people who were just trying to end a genocide and free Palestine. So I just think that it's important that we all kind of keep on doing what you're doing in all the ways that you can. And I think this is a very important part of that whole tradition. And then Sarah wants to say a few things as well.
I just want to echo my mother's gratitude for preserving this space in Papa's legacy. But I also want to say that my sister would have loved to have been here today. Her name is Harriet Clark, and the only reason why she's not here with us is because she's having her book launch today. And so in addition to being an incredible work of fiction, she's really kind of illuminating the impact of mass incarceration, especially in its impact on young people. So kind of in Papa's legacy, but we thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much. So without further ado, Dr. Morabia claims that he needs no introduction, but I will still have just a few words to describe his role here in the department as really one of our most beloved faculty members. In addition to being faculty here at Columbia, he's also faculty at CUNY and in the leads the Center Heart Study, which is a follow-up of the workers at the World Trade Center and their later cardiovascular disease. And he's written several books. Most recently was The Public Health Approach, Population Thinking from the Black Death to COVID-19. And a lot of you probably know him as his role of editor-in-chief of the American Journal of Public Health, which I think we're going to hear more about soon. And so with no further ado, Alfredo Morabia.
Thank you very much, Teresa and Barbara and Sarah, and thank you all for being here. I said no introduction because I've been here this summer for 37 years, you know. And the first year it was as a assistant professor. I was 1 year here as a visiting professor, most of the time as an adjunct. But you know, there is this expression which is very interesting, to be a fixture. Because in French, to be a fixture is that when are we going to get rid of that, you know? And here, apparently, it can sometimes be viewed as a compliment. Anyway, I've been here long enough to have known Alan in person. Actually, I've known him in 1998. It was a few years after he had come out of jail, and he was in charge of organizing courses and lectures in South Africa. And he sent me to Cape Town for a week to teach epidemiology. And this was 4 years into Mandela's presidency. The atmosphere in Cape Town was just tremendous. I mean, the students, the enthusiasm, everything. And so I've known, I came to your house, by the way, and that's where we arranged that. And a few years later, you know, I think most of you know the story of Alan. There is this biography, you know, by Susan Reverby, a co-conspirator, that you need to read. I mean, it's a beautiful biography. I had written a review of it, so I mean, if you want a shorter text. But essentially, moving forward in 2008 or 9, when Alan died, and I think this is important to understand Alan's character. We read the New York Times and you know, the obituary. And what did we discover? I mean, most of us had no idea of Alan's previous life. And so we had this meeting in the department, and Ezra Susser was the department chief at that time, director, and people were saying, Ezra, did you know this? Did you know this? And you know, Ezra, we knew. Let me explain. And so Alan was not the type of person who would go around bragging about his history, but he's an exceptional person. And so I feel extremely honored to be able to give this talk, especially also because the people who gave it before me are among the people I mostly admire and respect. So I feel really humbled by the challenge. But what I want to say essentially, you know, to Barbara and Sarah and all the friends of Alan is that, you know, I've missed Alan a lot, but I especially missed him last year. And I'm going to show you when I was threatened of having committed a federal crime as editor-in-chief of the journal. And I think today, in the current context, you know, Alan would be, you know, invaluable. There's no one to replace him. And that's now the moment we need him the most. So, all right, so let me tell you what made me prepare this presentation. I've been working a year on it, and it started soon after the inauguration last year. I started receiving those types of emails, you know, Dr. Morabia, in accordance to the president's executive orders, as an employee of that federal agency, I'm writing to officially withdraw myself from co-authorship on all manuscript in which I'm listed, and they were listed. Those were manuscript accepted or in press. And I received a lot of those. Sometimes they were asking to remove full articles. There was even a case of a full supplement that was just going to be published and they wanted to remove. Words in title, words in abstract, words in text. authorship. And, it soon appeared very clear to me that where do you stop? When people ask you to remove a word in a title and you agree, then what about removing the reference that has the word and erasing people's, record? So it was clear that there was no possibility to accept any of those things. And it was tough because I had to speak with all those team leaders, with people who were afraid to lose their health insurance, etc. But there was no way, I could put the finger in this process. And I was saying, I take responsibility, you tried, and that's it. And I have to say that I was confident because I knew I could defend, the freedom of press, etc., my activity if there were some litigation around it. And to my knowledge, nothing has happened to these people. To my knowledge, to the best of my knowledge, they're having resisted this didn't have terrible consequences for the people who stayed. And I had written this in an editorial, but what I wasn't expecting is this. And I don't want to show you too much of the detail because it's very complicated jargon, but essentially there was this US attorney who was saying that as the editor-in-chief of the American Journal of Public Health, I was committing a federal crime consisting of getting discounts on the mailing of the 20,000 copies we were sending each month, pretending that we were nonpartisan. But since we were partisan, we were not allowed to get those discounts, and this was a federal offense. And so, when you have this type of letters, and other journals too got it, you don't have your Gary Grant moment in the court. It's FBI coming, knocking at your door and taking you away. And so, I invite all of you to look into this, in case this happened to you, and this can happen to any of us. But there are issues like, what are you going to do with it? Do you know a criminal lawyer? What are you going to do with your phone, with your health prescriptions? How are you going to be dressed for the time it will take you to go to get your jail outfit, et cetera, et cetera? I mean, you get prepared, you have your small bag, and that's where, I thought if Alan was around. Anyway, so from this, I wanted to know, was this normal politics? Was this normal in America that science could be treated this way all of a sudden? And so I prepared this, I looked into the history of the way the government and the administration had treated scientists in different moments, different crises since the Second World War. And here are I'm going to cover, two of those crises, the atomic bombs and the essays in America and the fallout, the AIDS crisis. And these belong to a specific type of relationship of science with government. Then there is a change in those 30 years, and then there is the situation we know now. And so what happened during and I have lots of material, I won't cover it all, but again, if we need to in the conversation. But so in 1945, as you know, 80 years ago, there was the bombs, and rapidly after, this is important, there were medical teams in Japan who reported that the radiation had a carcinogenic effect. And those articles were published in 54, 55. This is not epidemiology, but it's a clinical assessment of immediate survivors. Well, the reaction of the authorities was to completely deny that there were any effects of the radiations. And this was US News and World Report in 1955. The director of the Atomic Energy Commission said, the world is radioactive, this is normal, we're adding a little bit to it, it's not... And so there was really misinformation. And in terms of epidemiology, it's also interesting to see that they started, the cohort started 10 years after. You know, there's never been an epidemiology of the immediate survivors from the bomb. They, if I can get rid of this, they started 10 years later, and some of them were retrospective, but there's been no epidemiologic data on this. And actually, the fallout has been enormous all over the country. And here you see the atomic tests that were done in Nevada and New Mexico, but actually the whole country had been covered with it, and people had been exposed. What there has been, and you know, those were the McCarthy years, the people who tried to say something and had some authority were harassed. They were taken in front of the McCarthy Commission. This is Edward Condon. He was responsible for the standard. He was establishing what is the standard of radiation that is safe. When he left the federal administration, he wanted to find a position in a university, was blacklisted. And so there was a lot of harassment. But in this context, universities could still do their own work, and even some parts of the government. You see, there was grassroots epidemiology, and this baby tooth survey, I don't know how many of you have heard about it, but it was even funded by the US Public Health Service. And it was an idea that Barry Commoner had to collect teeth from children all over the country and measure their content in strontium. And it was a grassroots movement with families, etc., involved. And when they published the study, the result, you have here the years, the number of teeth, and you see the strontium content of the teeth going up from 0.1 to 0.7. You know, people were really afraid, as you can imagine, and it had an impact. It was very interesting that it influenced, you know, the decision by JFK to actually partially ban nuclear tests. You know, they would not be in the atmosphere anymore. And just here a shout out, because I don't know how many of you know Barry Commoner, which center, you know, I had my first, my primary appointment, but he was a determinant person in this. So if we review the situation with the around the Cold War, which is a very important issue, you know, and the issue at stake were the security of the country, the Cold War. I mean, there was enormous element at stake for the government. There were, of course, lots of negative aspects like classified memos. NIH didn't fund some specific research, falsely reassuring public messaging, harassment of federal employees, but there were no direct intervention of the executive of the president. There were no interdiction. Federal employees could perform research. They could defend this and discuss them publicly, and universities were not penalized. So this was the first case. Let's look into the AIDS crisis, with which you are much more familiar here. I just remind you that by 82, it was known that AIDS was not a disease limited to gay men. I mean, this was a one-year report of MMWR. 75% were gay men, but they were other group. But it was still stigmatized for many years as being a disease of homosexuals. And as you know, also by 1983, it was known that the cause was a virus, epidemiology did not do a great job between 91 and 83. We were looking for environmental causes of it. It happened, it was a virus, a vicious virus, because it took them 2 years because the virus was killing the cells in which they wanted to grow it. But anyway, we had other problems. And this was the political situation in the 80s, a very conservative administration with enormous political support in the country. And this administration didn't want to hear about the AIDS crisis. And when you look at the evolution of the funding, during the first year, the NIH, the federal funding for HIV research was limited. And then in 1985, there is a change and it starts to grow. So what happens in 1985? Some people have characterized this as the most impactful or consequential event in the history of you all know, but here it is. It's the Rock-Hudson effect. And when Rock-Hudson declared that he had AIDS and he died of it, things changed. And I want to, at that time, we were not, so much impressed by the fact that this conservative Surgeon General, Koop, had a brochure that he sent across the country explaining what was the disease, use of condom, etc. But it was a decision that he took that didn't go with the administration. The Surgeon General office was independent. Then the involvement of the LGBTQ community. And this is also important because once the funding and the research for HIV increased, there was, of course, many conservatives who didn't want it to go over issues of homosexuality and condom use for prevention. But they didn't go through executive orders of the president. They went through Congress. And, as despicable as those acts are, they were a solid type of governance, because Congress passed the Helms Amendment, which prohibited the use of funds of CDC in some circumstances. The PEPFAR, some of the money was earmarked for abstinence programs, etc. But it was essentially through Congress that those attempt to impact public health research and intervention was done. And so during the AIDS crisis, we had delayed public acknowledgement of the crisis, restricting funding, discouraged explicit reference to the LGBT community. Congress defunding some program, but we didn't have executive orders. There were no legal interdiction for federal employees to perform research. Even there were a lot of autonomy, and universities were able to run their programs and their research. So until even 1993, I don't see any direct intervention from the executive power into epi and public health research. Now, things changed in 1994. These are all the number of executive orders that different presidents have taken. Let me move, we are annoyed by that. So you see that, every president takes, makes and signs executive order. The thing is that in almost all the cases, there is very little leeway of the presidency. There is control of Congress through one way or the other. I mean, Roosevelt, which was the one who used them the most, they use it to implement things that were related to his policies and social policies. Now things change, and this was a surprise, but to my knowledge, the first time an executive order about research appears, and this is during the 93-97 presidency. And what was this order? You may recall it or not. I mean, we may have all cheered a lot, be very happy. But this was an order that actually introduced diversity, equity, and inclusion in federal research and in federal funding. And the order was specifically about research, mentioned epidemiology, and we needed to include high-risk population, minority population, low-income, etc. And I think we all received that very positively. And it's actually a very successful order because probably the research community supported it and the federal agencies too. But it's interesting to see that immediately, and I found that, in retrospect, Harvard's law school mentioned that this was also a dangerous way of doing policy and of trying to regulate research, because it's a weak form of governance. Any president can cancel, rescind the previous executive order. A judge can block that. And so they said this was bringing us into an era of instability for public health and epidemiologic research, which we had not known. The OSHA was an executive order by a Republican president in 1971. It could be canceled by Congress, who didn't do it. I mean, public health research and epi research was not politicized. But we enter now in a new cycle. Each new administration rescinds everything that the previous has done, brings new. So the Republican administration that followed had its executive order, which canceled everything that the previous administration had done in terms, and DI, what has been called later DI, was very central to that. And that administration also introduced the idea of banning some words, but CDC was quite strong, and they were able to limit the impact of that. Then you have a new Democratic administration, and they canceled, rescind, and they have their new executive order. So we were entering in the last 30 years in a period in which there was this type of ping pong. Each administration was going to rescind what the other had done, and create really a situation of instability. I think during the 2016 to 21 administration, CDC and the universities and all the federal agencies were strong, and we didn't feel it. But things have changed now. And so during those 30 years, what we see are executive orders trying to define the way research is done, and this is completely new. But there was still no threat to federal employees. As you know, universities were not penalized. So we get now to the current administration. And, this is another way of looking at the executive orders, what I showed you before, but now during the first year of the administration. And you see, this administration had 221, but it was not much more than the Biden or the other one. But it has been taken extremely fast. It was taken in the first days. And I personally, and it's something that is debatable, but I call this a conservative revolution, because it is a revolution. it is a change, a deep change in governance of science. First. Second, it's done entirely by the executive. What has been the role of Congress? Never in the past did Congress let a president loose like that. So very fast adoption and signature of executive orders, and no role of Congress. And the third thing, which I tried to show you now, it's actually the application of a coherent policy agenda. And of course, it's messy because it's a revolution. Revolution, you don't do them every year. You have to improvise a lot. But it is a revolution. And to understand that, you have to also remember the importance of the Hungarian playbook in the preparation of Project 2025. So this is the key author and actor in Project 2025. And he says, modern Hungary is not just a model for conservative. It is the model. And other headlines have caught that, how Hungary's higher education overhaul became a model for US conservative. US science and university are becoming political hostages of the urbanization. That's the name of the president that was just lost the recent election in Hungary. So what is the Hungarian playbook? It's a playbook. It's not a series of decisions. It has some very specific goals, and over 15 years, they've accomplished that in Hungary. And this has three main components: control of universities, control of knowledge production, control of communication. And this completely transformed the relationship of science to the administration. We're going to go through all of them. And with two expected impact, first of all, brain drain. And that's what happened in Hungary too. People leave the country. Universities are depleted of their intellectual expertise, and weak institutional resistance. So let's look at control of universities, and we'll go through every element of this playbook. The autocracy index, I don't know if you're familiar with it. It appears regularly in New York Times. One of the elements is a marker of democratic erosion is trying to take over universities. Okay, 1 year ago, we were most likely to zero, okay? Now it says 20%. I don't know what it means. But one thing I'm sure is that people agree that it is a threat. 5 years ago, in January 2021, I had written an editorial in the AJPH called "The Fascist Threat." I had to fight my editors because they thought I was exaggerating, and I'm sure I would never have been able to publish it if I were not the editor of that journal. But today, how many people deny that the threat is real? So this is, you have the autocracy index, but you have also this famous compact for academic excellence and higher education, which is a list of requirements that the administration have sent now to 9 universities and now to many more colleges that they need to comply with in order to receive federal funding. And it covers every aspect of universities' life, from admission to tuitions, gender, and campus facilities, etc. So the Times for Higher Education concluded recently, March 2026, that the decline in university autonomy in the United States has been faster than any places like Hungary, India, and Turkey. So control of knowledge production, and this is at the center of, what we experience as epidemiologists, as researchers. First of all, there's been the dismantling of whole agencies. And without those agencies, nothing can work. And we are totally dependent on federal funding. There's been 200,000 civil servants that have left the federal workforce. Some agencies like USAID have virtually disappeared, but lots of agencies related to education, research have been also decimated. This is in Lancet recently. This US CDC on the brink. I think this is optimistic. Who trusts CDC today? It's not on the brink anymore. Is down the canyon. 80% of CDC's highest positions are vacant. Directors of 20 out of 25 centers have left. 2,000 out of 10,000 staff have been fired, etc. This is the evolution of grants funded by federal agencies. You have here 1 year of time from October to October, September, and then you have in black, here you have the situation in 21-24. You have in blue the situation last year, and you see this uptick because some judges considered as illegal the cancellation of some of the grants. But once those contracts, come to end, they won't be renewed for many of them, and that's where we are today. So really strangling the research community, and that these hundreds of words are forbidden. And I've been told by people at NIH that they are using this algorithm because to find out those 300 words in one proposal, only AI can do that. I mean, no human being can do it. And they use them to actually screen the content of. Now, one aspect of controlling knowledge production is to taking away our compass. All the surveillance health monitoring data are essential for us. They are being, removed, totally canceled in some areas that are extremely key. And imagine this is 1 year. In 10 years, there will be no way to assess what all those different issues, how they have evolved, and what are the problems. And there was this weatherman in Florida who had this video who went viral. He said, without data, I can tell you what will happen with hurricane. But actually, this is our situation. And in a few years from now is going to be terrible. And I want to also tell you that beyond the Hungarian playbook, there are 2 executive orders which have tremendous, extremely dangerous implications for science, and in particular public health and epidemiology. This is one of the executive orders imposes a new biological framework. And the other one wants to eliminate research domains and researcher. This executive orders defines what sex is, okay? You may think, okay, for administrative purpose, having a binary definition is fine. But this is not for administrative purpose. It's a ceiling. Nothing else exists. And nothing else would be funded. And nothing else is tolerated. And this represents 10% of the US population, people that consider themselves as non-binary. This is an imposition of a biological framework to a society while you remove any possibility to counter, this theory with new data, because you eliminate the data collection and you impose a framework that will only be funded in the years coming. And there are historical examples, I won't have time to talk about them today, but in which extremely dynamic and scientific communities, like in the USSR in the 40s, people who were really extremely strong and independent and faithful to science were forced to adopt a new framework in biology, which actually killed Soviet agriculture for 15 years, but had also tremendous implication on the scientific community, which followed. And after a while, there was only one thing that you could know in the Soviet Union was those Lysenkoists, which was a form of Lamarckian evolutionary theory that was applied to agriculture. Well, I could talk much more about it, but the second very, very dangerous executive order is the one that wants to annihilate, to remove entirely the community that works on diversity, equity, and inclusion. I mean, this is, and the wording, if you read the executive order, excise, it's completely different from the wording and previous one. And if we lose these people, I mean, it will have an impact on all of us. I mean, this is research on the most explosive aspect of our society. This is material that has done 2 civil wars on 100 years apart, one in 65 and the civil rights movement. I mean, blocking this and forcing the institution to become blind to it can have absolutely terrible consequences, and it will affect all of us. And again, here I could tell you about the elimination of non-Aryan scientists in Nazi Germany, how fast it went, and the consequences on German medicine, which was the greatest in the world before 1943 and became a terrible agent of state genocide. And anyway, so the third element, and if you don't see the playbook, the third element is control of communication. And this is where the letter I just showed you come into. It's not by chance. It's not this guy in Washington who decided that he wanted to attack the editor of several journals. It's part of a playbook to change and control the way science is published. NIH has closed some journal, Environmental Health Perspective, Preventing Chronic Diseases. MMWR is extremely censored. We had began to publish some of the material that was eliminated there, but you don't replace MMWR with AJPH, you need to have the expertise, the network, etc. Censorship, as I showed you, federal threat. The letter I got, other journals got it too, at least, because I think some of them may not have wanted to reveal it. And also the restrictions on international communication, which is also part of this attempt to control communication. Then the expected consequences. I'm sorry if I'm, if you get too much depressed, but I don't mind, but there's nothing I can do about. I mean, the brain drain. And this was in Nature. I don't know, I was surprised, but it's in Nature. And the poll by Nature found that 75% of researchers in the US considered leaving. I mean, even if it's not 75%, the brain drain is a real threat. It's not something abstract. And when we're only 1 year into it last, and then they were expecting weak institutional resistance. And I have to say that that's what didn't play in the Hungarian playbook. At the beginning, there was a lot of confusion and a lot of wrong movement, but globally, the system has tried and the university have begun to react. This compact I've told you about that the administration sent to 9 universities, 7 of them refused. The 2 others, one is in Texas, one is in Tennessee. But I mean, there was a large majority which, completely refused it. And the other element, which is also extremely important, was very courageous, was the Bethesda Declaration. Last year, 300 officials from NIH institutes and center signed this condemnation of what was going on. And tens of thousands of people signed it. So this is the Hungarian playbook, and this is what's going on. It's not the messy, decision in one direction or the other. It's a directed plan. We're 1 year into this. It could last 10 years, 15 years. There's no guarantee that this will not happen. And this is not the worst case scenario, the Hungarian, because Hungary had to have elections. It belongs to the European community. Orban would have, canceled the election, they would have been out of the community. They couldn't do it. And that's how, after 15 years, even its most faithful base got, enough of it. And he had rigged the election to the point that every rural vote counted 3 times more than an urban vote. He had his base voting and electing him. He should have won all the elections. But people had enough, but it took 15 years. Now, we don't have this protection of our elections. And the other thing we don't have is the protection against political violence. If any political violence is introduced in the electoral process and the country is out of the European community, but we know, that this is not true here. René Good, Alex Pretty, and others, so the Hungarian playbook is not the word. So let me close with a few words. First of all, what's my review, historical review? If it's published, you're going to have all the references and everything. I couldn't do what I called this shadow boxing, that we all do, because that's how we work in science. We have all this contradiction. And by the way, that's what does not exist when all the counters ideas are forbidden. But I think it's the first time that you have explicit government-fostered censorship in the US, attempt to distort the scientific. Where is the limit? And I really think we are at risk of losing our compass and our soul. And as I wrote in the editorial that I talked to you about, every element of resistance matters. We must consider it, what actions, however small, are necessary to counter those tactics. However small is very important. And let me finish with some words about Alan. This is from his biography by Susan Reverby. And she wrote, "In the end, Alan came to believe that his medical skills, when shared with activists and those most harmed by the racist, sexist, and neo-imperialist policies, might actually be more revolutionary. His shifted frame of reference never changed his priorities or principles, but the way he accomplished them. He moved from the care of individuals to the care of population. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we're all very moved. Might need a few minutes to digest such a wonderful lecture. I'd like to just add one announcement before we move on to what I hope is going to be a very robust Q&A. This could be important to many of you. That the HIV Center Zena Stein Memorial Lecture is happening May 21st at 9:30 a.m. And we're going to follow up with an email about it. Greg Gonzalez will be speaking, so I wanted you to keep that on your radar and look out for the email. If we'd like to start by taking questions for those here in the room, we can begin.
Hi, thank you, Dr. Morabia. That was upsetting, but good to hear, I think. My name's Adam Whalen. I'm a third-year doctoral student in Epi. I think that my biggest takeaway from your talk was how much planning went into the state of the world that we're living in now. Like, a lot of those executive orders were implemented the first day of this administration. It's basically you come into office and you press send. And I guess my question, maybe for you or anyone, or for us to just think about, is so much planning went into that and preparing for this moment and taking advantage of the levers of power once they had them. Is the same amount of planning going into what might happen if the people in power switch again? And specifically from the perspective of public health and from epidemiology, like what can we be doing to make sure that when we do have, let's say the upper hand again, that we are able to implement the changes to strengthen our scientific community again on day one? Thanks.
Thank you. I mean, this is, of course, a very important question that every one of us, ask it. Oh, I think that I need to stay here because of the, is this a long-term change of the way the government works in the United States? I mean, if we have a Democratic president, I mean, whatever the condition, what should we do? Should we use this executive power to actually do the same but in the other direction? Should we use a real strong majority to change some aspect of the constitutions which are being used in those, the number of people at the Supreme Court, the Electoral College, I mean, the different aspects that are key to explain this victory, the rigged elections, the process that we are witnessing. I think it's a key question that it should be at the center of our reflection of how far we want to go into a new regime, which is presidential, with full powers to one man, or we want to go back to a system of, balanced power between Congress, which, and the composition of Congress. So I think it's a great, great question. I don't think anyone has the answer, but we need to have one before the transition takes place.
Thank you so much, Dr. Morabia, for giving that talk. It was very informative, and I think really reflects what's going on right now. I'm a second-year MPH student, and clearly not in theoretical physics. Well, so I think all of us in health sciences, like public health, we have we know that our science is deeply tied to like the public interest, and at least I take great pride in that, like having something kind of theoretical be of service to a greater public. And generally I'd say this public interest is represented by society in like civic groups and other group organizations, as well as the state. I'm not talking about like administrations like Democrats or Republican. I'm just saying like CDC, for example, that's part of the normal state functions, right? And so if these generally, if the administration is smart, they get to run the the tools of state at the moment. They let scientists sort it out. They let scientists say, we decide the conventions of how science is done, of how science is published and disseminated. But right now it seems that they're like filtering, right, what kind of science can be done, what kind of scientists should be allowed to produce that kind of science. And with a lot of local support, like you see very local demonstrations, and even like online, the climate is quite anti-science at times, especially in certain like political groups and stuff like that. And I just found that like the filtering process has been done so easily, and you know and what the purpose of this, I think, is to like direct science. This administration wants to direct science for its own use, for its own interest. For example, using like AI, especially like warfare, because it has that kind of hawkish mindset already, right? Which is quite frightening to someone like myself. And we see that there are people who actually support that, and there seems to be a tension between science and public opinions. But think about that again, would you say that like it's better to look at like the systems that came up with the conditions that made this kind of filtering, made this tearing down of certain scientific institutions so easily, rather than like thinking too hard about like right now what exactly is happening, the barriers falling away, but what actually gave rise to how Trump and a lot of people who support him so easily like destroyed not destroyed, but like kind of eroding the institutions. So
Yeah, thank you. That's a very important question too. And I'm not a wizard, but as you can imagine. But what I like in the way you ask the question is that, you know, how did this situation emerge? This is very important. Nobody was seeing it. I mean, very few people expected it. Most of us, we never had believed that the situation would be what it is today. But actually, when you look in the detail, there's been the status of epi research and public health has been getting more and more politicized over time since the 1990s. There were a lot of elements that we should have noticed, but we didn't, because we were so comfortable and so confident that we as researchers and the agencies which are supporting us are on the same page. Now, this has changed dramatically, and I think the confusion that it has generated explains why there was, you know, the extent of the changes that have been done. The reaction should have come much earlier. The problem is that now we are in a situation that may last. I mean, so I know some of you think they're going to vote in October, November, but you cannot count on that. And this situation may last for a long time. So what will come out is a different form of science, a science that you will not recognize if it goes this way. I don't say there's no possibilities of something else happening, and we can be extremely surprised like we were in Minneapolis. Frankly, the reaction, degree of self-organization were completely unexpected and were very positive. But given the current constellation, the risk of having this lasting for a long time are very high. Yeah, there was Carrie, and then I will.
Thanks, Alfredo. I had one reaction or comment and then a question. at the beginning of your talk, when you showed the letter that the government sent to you, basically accusing you of being partisan or biased, it was not surprising to me as someone who studied commercial determinants of health for a long time. Anytime you're up against, I've been called conflicted, biased by the alcohol industry for years, because they call me anti-alcohol, which I'm not. But that's the playbook, is like, if you're not on their side, then to position you as biased. So I just thought that was an interesting kind of parallel. And I wanted your reaction to that. And then my question was, I have found that there are people in Columbia leadership and elsewhere who, when faculty have expressed reserve or concern about submitting NIH grants where we're asked to change language or, kind of change our science, or at least the description of our science to fit federal priorities, they say, if you've been around for a long time, this has happened before, we had to do this in other administrations, and they characterize it as no big deal, business as usual. But from what I've gathered from, your talk and others, this is not business as usual. It's qualitatively quite different. And so I'm wondering if you agree with that, and how we can, as researchers, respond to leadership who are saying, don't worry about it.
So, yeah, thank you, Carrie. For the first point, I think it's very important to see that the attacks are not on the content.
No, they never are.
Okay, they're finding crimes, and this you can see in all different areas. They trying to criminalize you, and then send the FBI, and it doesn't even go through a judge, and you're there for you don't know how long. Okay, so that's what's vicious about this approach, and there's nothing you can do. You see, you have Congress doesn't do anything. Who's going to defend you? And of course, my situation is 100 or 1,000 times better than our Palestinian students or all the other international students that have been arrested and deported. So they criminalize you, and it's not about the content, because for those who know AJPH, I have a very strong record in incorporating everybody, including public health Republicans. I believe that public health works if we include everybody. Otherwise, we don't work. And so I had a strong record. I could have done my Gary Grant moment in court, but that's not what they let you do. Now, in terms of business it's absolutely not business as usual. I couldn't find a single situation in the past where these things were forced. And this is very important, because an error that many people have done is to act preventively. You see, you need to wait until the threat is there, because between threatening you, scaring you, and acting, there's a big difference. And your possibility of response are very, very different. So you should never respond preemptively. Don't believe that by accepting to remove your name from this article, you're going to be better off. Actually, you're going to be worse, because there is another executive orders that say that people that try to mask their past should be fired immediately. So if you ask someone to remove your name, then you fall into it. So I think that's the response. As long as there is no clear, documented threat that if you do this, you're going to have that, you should never do it. And every moment, every day counts, because you don't know what's going to happen. But every moment counts, and I'm sure Alan could have told us much more about it.
Thank you so much, Alfredo. I wanted to kind of comment, I guess, a response to something you said and get your feedback on it. I think in response to the point about each of us needing to kind of figure out what resistance looks like for ourselves, no matter how small. I think about my own kind of personal experience in that, in terms of being someone who was kind of told I needed to change language in a grant, and having a question, like a question that I still don't fully know what the right answer was, is it being resistant to refuse to change the language, or is it being resistant to change the language but then do the work as I intended anyways, right? And in trying to formulate that question, it actually brings the point to me about, I think the word that comes to mind most to me as the way you characterize what the other side has done is they were organized. And I think that when we view kind of our response in kind of individual silos, it misses that point of this idea of like the broader organization. So like what, as opposed to individual actors trying to decide what my individual resistance looks like, what would it look like to have a higher level organization collectively deciding this is the path forward? And I'm wondering if you could comment what you could see that looking like within an institution like this, considering that institutions like this are the ones often under fire.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, thank you. Couple of points. First of all, changing the words or adapting your grant proposal. What I was talking about were articles that were accepted. They were not ongoing further peer reviews, etc. So it was censoring, and it was so the situation is different when you write your grant. The problem is that don't think you're going to fool anyone, okay? And people are not after this word, they're after us. And in the duration, that's how they try to eliminate a whole sector of research and domain of research. So I think it's very important, especially your age, you'll still be there when this is going to be gone, even if it lasts a while. But you need to be, faithful to yourself. If the changes you do, the adaptation you do are, acceptable for you, then I would say they're fine. You should go with it. You'll never be ashamed of what you've done. But if you try to adapt to save yourself, no way. And there are a lot of examples like that. In the Soviet Union, I didn't talk about those things, but some researchers tried to adapt to mask, etc. It lasted 15 years. They were destroyed in the process, and themselves were destroyed. So it's very important to keep, the statue inside that is solid as marble, and to adapt to as much as you can in this context. I would say that. Now, the other aspect is the collective response. It's crucial. It's crucial. And frankly, my feeling is that universities who have responded collectively and in which the leadership has taken responsibility have a much tighter follow-up by students and universities that were criticized by everybody who was inside now don't criticize anymore, because there is a sense of unity of representing a body. And of course, a collective response is much stronger. And and when I was saying, my little contribution, I think what I did at journal was my little contribution. And it was a few articles over a few weeks. But I think it mattered. And it saved all those researchers who, in fact, didn't want their name to be removed, were proud of their work, and they can still have their work. Yes.
I was just thinking about the control of knowledge production as a primary strategy of this regime, but thinking about people that have tried to like Marx and Gramsci democratize knowledge production. And I was wondering if in the field of public health, kind of digging into community-based research or these strands of more democratized research methods might be a way to resist, or if it's just another thing that they will shut down because any proposal that has that in it, they would see. But it also related to some of the things you were saying about the ways in which they've been able to position these places as ivory towers or, you know, scientists as this. But if you kind of build relationships in community in Washington Heights, if you think about sharing power in those spaces, it might be a good strategy. I don't know. What do you think?
It's a good point, Sarah. And I mean, from I tell you my perspective when I was the editor, you know, and I was seeing all this research coming, I think, yeah, okay, the research I was seeing, the most interesting one, you know, I think the most innovative one and the most promising one was the research that didn't only observe what was going on in population, but at the same time trying to transform it. And there are frameworks like, you know, intersectionality and other, in which, you know, the researchers are involved in their community. I think those research and those methods are key. But one of the goal of the current regime is to eliminate. And if we lose those, we'll go backwards for decades. That's
Thank you so much for this amazing talk. I was particularly happy to hear you start out by saying that much of their plans are really well thought out, because I think it's so tempting for all of us to look at everything that's happening and think they're just crazy and they have no idea what they're doing and none of this can last because it's not part of a strategy. And I think what we're hearing and seeing is that that is not the case. And I think it means we have to take this seriously. But my concern, as somebody who's part of a program at Bellevue Hospital called the Program on Survivors of Torture, is that in practice, many of these public health programs are already getting dismantled, not because even the government has come after them yet, but in anticipation of that. This program is an internationally renowned and leading program dealing with survivors of torture, and Bellevue just disbanded it because of their concern that it's going to bring more heat on Bellevue. And I guess my question is for everybody, how is it in practice that those of us who are involved like this can bring public attention to this and fight it? Because I'm not as optimistic as you, I think, that these institutions are actually fighting back. I see more capitulation.
the only thing I would say, because I cannot really answer what was going on.
Cigars has entered the visiting.
Okay, that's very important. Do you want to come and say hi? No, I mean, no problem. I cannot say much about your question. The only thing I would say is that in some ways we need to give time, you know, and there's, I don't know if it's in English expression too, but we were all shocked and taken by surprise. And I think now we need to realize that we are entering in a process that we require heavy resistance. Otherwise, it can go very far and it can transform science and our concept of it for decades.
Hi, Alfredo. Thanks. Right here.
Yeah.
Hi. So I wanted to ask you a question about a small group of other influential actors in this moment, and that's billionaires, trillionaire as well, in influencing the current political moment and what insights you might share about other billionaire or ultra-rich classes in these other periods and examples that you've provided of having influence in, determining public health and research and science, et cetera. And then also any insights and strategies for resistance against this financial power that we face.
I mean, I don't have a direct answer to this question. There's nothing that comes to mind about the role of extremely rich people fighting science the way it is. I think most of the people who are now ranging behind the current administration were viewed as pretty progressist during the previous year. I mean, if you think of Meta or even Amazon or Microsoft or all those, they entered in our life more as opening possibilities rather than closing them. Now, I think they've changed on their orientation, and the only thing that comes to mind to your question, but I would need time to elaborate, and I will, but it's of course the 1900s. That's the Golden Age, because there you had those very rich million, at that time, Rockefeller and all these other people who were buying president and influencing all of our politics. I don't know that these had a major impact on science, whatever was the science then, but an important role of very rich people. For me, the only thing that comes to mind immediately is that time in the 1900s with Teddy Roosevelt, etc. But I'll look into it. Thank you.
Maybe ask a question from a student? Yeah.
Hi, firstly, thank you so much for such a wonderful presentation. I'm a second year MS in Epi student about to graduate, and as the presentation progressed, I couldn't help but feel sympathy towards myself for graduating at this time. Yes. And I wanted to ask that, as someone who wants to is aspiring to have a significant role in public health field, what would you recommend, or what would your recommendations be as to how to steer through these censorships or these like propaganda or whatever, and just like have a clear path?
Okay. I mean, I have an answer for that, and it's of everything I said, it's going to be the most positive one. I said I've been here for 37 years. I give them all to be a 35-year-old assistant professor today here. You can take them all. Because there is also another way of looking at this level of destruction, that people like you, your age, you are going to have to rebuild from scratch. And this is exciting because we've tried for decades to try to accommodate a system which was wrong in its foundations. But now, all these administrations, CDC and other, are going to lose their foundations, lose trust, etc. I mean, do we really need a system of healthcare based on treatment? Shouldn't we start to build a system around prevention and everything else? I mean, this is what your generation is going to do. I don't know when, but at some point, and you'll be young enough by then, you'll be able to have a huge impact on future generations. And this, I envy you.
Well, we all hope that's true. Hi, I'm a PhD student. I have a lot of discussions with master's students, and I feel like you know, for the folks that are graduating right now, a lot of my advice that I find myself giving is advice for survival. Because frankly, at this point, if you're coming out, you have student loans, you have to make a living. It's like, I just find myself doing a lot of, well, you know, if you have to work in industry, if you have to do something else, you know, just to get by, you know, keep up your practical skills, bide your time. And you don't know, as you said, when that will be, that things will get better, but like, do what you need to do. So I guess what I'm curious about, you know, obviously we all would like for the resistance to be more collective, but we're seeing a lot of stuff not materialize, including here at Columbia, unfortunately. It's a lot we'd like to see that's not happening. What do you think would be some effective or important acts of resistance that younger folks can do in this moment? It's anticipating that hopefully there will be a time that's not going to be 10 years, 15 years down the line that, you know, we'll be able to kind of get back in the game, but still, you know, doing something at the moment that feels useful.
Yeah, that's another very difficult, very difficult question. You know, and again, I'm not going to be very original, but I think what is really important, and maybe today more than in the time where we didn't have so much isolation and Zoom, etc., is to, you know, organize in person with other students like you, people that are undergoing the same situation, and sharing your ideas and your responses, etc. I think the most important thing is not to stay alone. And as much as possible, you know, break the screen type of relationship and organize in such a way that you can talk freely and you can try to find solutions. This is the only thing that comes to mind now.
You know, so Alan.
Oh, so the mic is coming.
Just a little blast from the past here, but this is the Alan Berkman lecture. When people started Health Gap, they didn't start with big drug companies. In fact, they were fighting the CDC and the big companies. They started I think in the attic. What was the meeting? It was in like the attic of the gay center or something. It was a bunch of ACT UP people who had been in prison with us, people who had started HIV programs in prison with nothing. And I know it's totally frightening to think about. But so we're going to have to go back to liberation schools and independent papers that take your paper and publish it somehow without a lot of money, and just we have to be revolutionary back at the revolution, at the conservative revolution. I just feel like at a certain point trying to convince institutions, which I've signed every petition. I always either pretend I'm a student or I was graduate or something. But at a certain point, and it's really good. I mean, the students at CUNY, the Students for Justice in Palestine at CUNY, just, I hope, succeeded in kicking Hillel off the campus, because Hillel has been a big force for Zionism. So I agree with you that people have to hang together. And also I want to bring back what Sarah was saying. She had to leave, but she has been involved in participatory action research, is that what it's called, and things that do bring in communities, and then you have community newspapers and everything. You don't have the money, you stand on a street corner. I mean, I know it's a little bit pie in the sky, but I just feel like as long as we're constantly trying to figure out, should I take my name? I have an organization of release agent people in prison. We've gotten funding cut off. Luckily, we never got that much of it, so it doesn't make that much difference. But so we go to community fundraising things. You know, we're a tiny organization. But I really feel like from everything you said, looking at the structure, because it's all run by the billionaires, whether they're behind the New York Times or behind the Post or behind Trump, they're all looking for ways that every system of healthcare will make money for them. whether it's through medications and not prevention or anything else. So I don't know, I feel like, I know it's hard at the end of our lives to be saying that to people who are at the beginning of their lives, but that's what we did in the 60s and 70s. That's how the Panthers and the Young Lords started screening. They forced the institutions to respond for sickle cell screening. It didn't exist. So yeah,
that's right.
I don't know if Alan would agree with that. I can't speak in his name. He did often disagree with me, so there you go.
Thank you.
I totally agree with what you've said, and I think maybe turning resistance into political education would help, like Sarah mentioned Marx and Gramsci, but the boys, but there's so many other people to study and learn from. But I want to ask taking it a slightly different, positively, well, actually negative direction. A quick contextual concern is you say that you were prepared, but weren't some of these things laid out in the Project 2025 that Trump and Stephen Miller and those guys, I mean, you didn't know exactly how it was going to roll out, but it was there. And I think part of political education would be studying these guys too.
Thank you. Ezra. What? I mean, I'm learning from them, take a tip from those who tried, and that, thank you. I appreciate those comments.
Yeah, well, it's in a way it's similar, but that was a great talk. And the only small things that I think are important, that they're not small, but things I would like to add. I think institutional resistance has been weak, actually, in the universities, and that a lot of people have said that. So I really think it has very few high administrators in any universities have come out publicly, in opposition to this. But even more important, I think that it's not just from the top. Project 2025 is like Heritage Foundation. These are the guys that they're like the I don't know if you call them intellectuals, but they're like those kind of leaders. But there's also from the bottom, what's happening is there's this alliance there is a fascist movement, and Bannon and people like that, they've created a whole culture, and somehow this has led to something different in Hungary. Hungary looks like the playbook, but they didn't really go like Hungary. They did everything in the first month. It's more like Hitler than Hungary. I'm not saying it's like Hitler, it's more like Hitler than Hungary. As soon as he got power, he took over all the important, just like Trump did, everything, And then 6 months later, he went after his political opponents, That hasn't happened yet so much here. But, I think that's the road we're on with the midterm elections coming. And like you said, are they really going to allow power to be transferred in the midterm elections? I don't see it. So I feel like this is the moment, that if we don't resist now, then it's a long-term thing, So that's all I wanted to add. But, yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. I agree with you.
Thank you. Just wanted to be aware of the time where we're out. Maybe just take one more question, because then it's going to be time for to thank Alfredo and say goodbye. So one more question. I know there's lots of eager hands earlier. Okay. Great. Thank you for us today, and continue the conversation.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.